All right, so let's jump right into it. Tim Brookes, what are you hoping to accomplish with the Endangered Alphabets Project as we close out 2022 and move into 2023?
So, at the risk of going from the specific to the general, which is always a great way to lose and confuse people right from the get-go. There's two things have happened just recently that I think I really want to talk about today, and obviously need to be at the heart of what we do in 2023. So two different people who really work quite closely with me on a volunteer basis, with the alphabets, said independently of each other, so what exactly are we doing here? Why are we doing it? And one person said, for example, I understand biodiversity. I understand endangered species. But why alphabets? Why writing? What's that all about? And the other person was is somebody who works a lot in a very much the same field as us. And he asked a different question, which is also related to what we do. So the Endangered Alphabets also supports newly created scripts. And I can explain why. But this person was saying, I hear that new scripts, they just kind of muddy the water and they cause contention among communities. And, so I'm just asking myself, is that really a good thing?
Right.
And I was sort of staggered by that. But it was really clear that whenever you have a new idea or a new perspective, it takes a great deal to kind of make that shift where people see things that they've never seen before.
Absolutely.
So, for example, I was talking to somebody who is actually involved entirely in our field, and he kept saying endangered languages, and then he would say, "Oh no, I mean endangered scripts." Right. And I thought, when you have a phrase that your mouth goes to, right, it's a sign that you have a perspective that your mind goes to, and you're used to being there. And I thought, this is something that we really need to talk about. But I thought it also really might be interesting to start by you talking about some of the work that you do, which is perhaps a little closer to people's experience than, scripts and writing systems and whatnot. But it really speaks to that issue of diversity as well. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And I like that you mentioned the biodiversity part at the beginning there, because I think that gives us a good sort of springboard. Because a lot of the work that I do in the inclusion and diversity field is really focused on culturally responsive inclusion and diversity. So understanding the cultural context from which people are operating so that you can incorporate inclusion and diversity initiatives in a way that's authentic for them and that makes sense to them, which is absolutely crucial. Both for reasons of effectiveness and just, from a moral standpoint. And it's also making sure that it is linguistically appropriate, which then leads us to issues of linguistic inclusion. And that's where, that's what my other focus is making sure that all languages have space in either the physical or the digital commons. And I think the reference to biodiversity is useful in there because, as you said, you can look at biodiversity and say, okay, I see why it's important. I see why it's useful. We need it because we need a diverse and healthy biome for the sustenance of life, that kind of thing. Okay, and then you can see, broken down to its essential elements, what we're saying is you can see how it directly benefits you, right? When you're talking about linguistic vitality or script vitality, in this case, it's harder to see how it benefits you directly, right? If I'm a user of the Latin alphabet or one of its many variants, or the Cyrillic alphabet or one of its many variants, etc., and Cherokee dies out, okay, what, I can still write. Like my life is not constrained in any way by the disappearance of that script. Perhaps that is true. I would actually argue that there is a level on which that is not true, but we'll bracket that aside for a moment. Perhaps that is true. What we're looking at here, though, is, and this gets right into it, is a fundamental element of diversity and inclusion. We can't just look at it in this utilitarian way. How does it benefit me? How are my material prospects or conditions either diminished or elevated by the existence or non-existence of this thing? We have to look at it in a sort of deontological way as well, from a moral standpoint. These languages, these scripts, have the right to exist. And that's what we're really looking at here. The Cherokee script has a right to exist. The Bété script has a right to exist. Nyushu has a right to, like, all of these things have an intrinsic right to exist, an intrinsic right to take up space, an intrinsic right to be respected, to be valued, to be used, to be free of unjust marginalization. And so whether it affects you, me, whatever user of a dominant script negatively or not is really beside the point. What we're talking about is this is a script that was developed by people who care about the script, care about their culture, care about their language, and deserve to take up just as much space in our collective grapholinguistic commons as anybody else does, as any user of a Latin or Cyrillic or Greek or Arabic-based script. So that's how those two things really tie in, this sort of fundamental idea that groups of people, cultures are intrinsically worthy and have an intrinsic right to coexist alongside others, even if they don't happen to be the dominant culture, or in this case, the dominant script. So that's really where we're coming from when we look at this.
So once again, you've come up with this great phrase. I keep thinking that you need to have a silkscreen machine next to you so you can t-shirts as soon as we finish talking. So yeah, our collective grapholinguistic commons. Yeah. It's much more convenient for people not to think collectively.
Of course it is.
So when I've had conversations with people in the past about the issue of extinction, I say, well, it's like, let's consider the spotted owl. So you may not see a spotted owl in your entire life, and you may have no sense that it's part of your, collective biome. And so if you have a decent heart, then you might well say, well, if the spotted owl died out, it would be a shame. And I kind of go, yeah, it would be a shame to you. To the spotted owl, it's the worst catastrophe that could possibly happen.
Mm-hmm. It's literally the end of the world for the spotted owl.
That's right. Yeah. So interestingly enough, going back to this business of endangered alphabets, endangered languages, the whole endangered languages movement began with a very influential paper in the early to mid 1990s. And the argument that the authors made was not actually the argument that you've just made, and that obviously I believe in as well. It was a different argument that actually was, in a way, more broader and more philosophical, but also less understanding and sympathetic. Mm-hmm. So the argument it made was that if we as professional academic linguists, because this was the authorship and the readership, if we're interested in language in its, with a capital L in its broadest sense, then we need to understand how language works in as many contexts as possible. Mm-hmm. And if we only study, because this was true for centuries, if we only study the languages that are close to us or our linguistic heritage, such as Greek and Latin and Hebrew and, these sort of Western ancestral languages, then we assume that we know how language works by studying those languages.
Exactly.
And the fact is, the further afield you go, the more you start discovering languages that don't behave in the same way. Right. So there's a script in I think in the Pacific Islands that only has 11 letters. And there's a language in the Brazilian rainforest that only has 10 sounds. And so for people studying language to go, wait a second, these people seem to be okay. They survive pretty well. They're in a very, very demanding environment, but they managed to get by with only 10 linguistic sounds. What does that tell us about language we didn't know before?
Absolutely.
So that, in a sense, is the biome that you're talking about in terms of language. It's like, unless we really understand all of that, we basically come to two conclusions. One, everyone is like us. And two, everyone ought to be like us.
Yeah, there we go. Yep. And that is part of why, that was the sort of extended thing that I was bracketing aside, saying that, a given script disappears, a given language disappears, it doesn't really affect you directly. It goes back to that. You might not feel the immediate effects, but it leads to exactly what you're saying. This narrowing of the understanding of what language is and can be, or what writing is and can be. And therefore, this sort of feedback loop where we get information that encourages us to believe that indeed all scripts work like this, or language, writing as a thing works like this, language as a thing works like this. Whereas the more diversity there is, the more examples of it we have available to us, we can say, oh, writing can act like this as well. I mean, imagine you were from a position, and China having developed a writing system not alongside, but having a writing system fairly well established by the time contact between the people who used the descendants of the Phoenician alphabet got in contact with them. It's made it so that we've always sort of had this understanding, or have long had this understanding. But imagine we didn't know what pictographic writing styles were like at all, and we thought that writing by definition meant a letter for each syllable, or a letter for each phoneme or group of phonemes, or something like that. How restricted would our idea of writing be? Or imagine you were using a script like, most of the Semitic scripts, like Arabic and its derived scripts, or Hebrew, that can optionally mark for vowels, but usually don't mark for short vowel sounds, right? Imagine that was the only experience you had. And then you encountered Greek or Cyrillic or one of the Latin alphabets. You're like, well, wait, you write all of the vowel sounds? Why would you do that? Why not just write the long vowel sound? Like, it would blow your mind that a writing system that routinely incorporated short vowel sounds exists. So think of what is out there that could radically change or expand or add to our idea of what writing can be, what language can be, and we just haven't discovered it yet. I think one of the greatest shortcomings of the traditional, and you so very correctly said, that sort of traditional linguistics view was inadvertently brought to light by Wittgenstein, who I dig what he was trying to do with the whole language games things and all of that. But in his philosophy, when he talks about language games, you can tell he has not had much experience with, for example, heavily agglutinative languages like Inuktitut or something like that. The way he talks about words, the way he talks about word boundaries and morpheme boundaries, you can tell that the idea of word boundaries being so fluid as they are in so many languages just hasn't occurred to him, because the languages he's most exposed to don't work that way. So that's what he thinks language is.
Right. And I think there's an interesting analogy here with music. So if you go back to, say, the end of the 19th century, the time of the British Empire, one of the most popular forms of music was marching band music, or marches and band music separately if they didn't actually march around. And Queen Victoria was extremely fond of marching band music. And if the British Empire had in fact covered the entire surface of the world, then you would have had a situation where not only would there have been this kind of narrowing of acceptable styles, where basically everything is in 2/4 time, or the occasional waltz here and there. But you've got things like scale. Okay, so this is the Western scale. This is what music consists of. Instrumentation. These are the instruments that music consists of. And anything else is not music. It becomes an issue of language and definition, and use the word definition just now. And anything outside that is viewed emotionally with sort of derision or contempt. But then academically, it's viewed as being not worth study and outside our definition of what we're doing and what is valuable and important. And that is a slippery slope, ladies and gents. That is racism very, very close to the surface.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
And one of the things that I like to point out is that the music that Oscar uses for the intro and outro for the Endangered Alphabet's video products, as we say, 100 years ago wouldn't have been considered music, because it contains some sound effects. There's some, gently breaking waves in the background. It's got music that is tonal, that goes beyond our notions of, tones and half tones. It's got instrumentation that comes from Indonesia. And somehow with music, we've been able to elasticize our definition to the point where nowadays we say, yeah, that's music. That's nice. I like that, and with writing, we haven't got there yet. It's still, there's writing, and then there's this other stuff which we can call picture writing, or some other sort of childish activity, or derisive term on our point. But I think, to sort of go back to the very first point you made in terms of our understanding of other cultures and peoples, and our recognition that they are equal to us, is really at the heart of all of this. We got a great piece of writing sent in about 6 weeks ago by one of our many friends, volunteers, assistants, scattered all over the world. And the point he made was that a script, the way that you, in your particular culture, especially if it's a minority culture, represent meaning on paper, or on walls, or on fabric, or on your own skin, or whatever, is a way of being seen, and being seen that you are seen. And for so many of these minority cultures, the prevailing wind is blowing against them.
Absolutely.
And what it's doing is it's constantly sending a message out that either you don't exist, or you don't exist anymore, or that you're not worthy to exist. You're a second-class citizen of the world. You're a third-class citizen of the world. You don't even come to the table to be a citizen of the world. And So when we in the endangered alphabets show their forms of writing, they get to see themselves and they get to see a recognition that, as you said, they have the right to exist in the fashion that they choose to exist.
There we go. There we go. And I think that last part is really crucial too. They have a right to exist in the fashion that they choose to exist, and in the fashion, not just that they choose, but in the fashion that they create to exist. You know, and that really, really honing in on that sense of agency. I think that's really important. I feel hopeful in a way with that music analogy, which I really like, by the way. I feel hopeful when I look at it that way because, you know, as you very correctly point out, we've sort of elasticized what we think of as music to encompass so many things now, rightly so. But then I think about like the early 20th century, and I think about the reaction to jazz when jazz was first being created. The way people, like you read the way people would talk about jazz. Now, let's be very clear, there was a big racial element to that. It was the community that jazz came from that was really being talked about in many cases. But the way people would talk about jazz, it's not music. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just too chaotic. Where's the time signature? And now we look at jazz and we look at people like Coltrane, we look at Vince Guaraldi, people like that who obviously were geniuses with it. And we see what we would have been missing if we had consigned that to the realm of non-music and just let it sit there. But hopefully something similar, and again, understanding the analogy isn't perfect for the reasons just outlined, but hopefully something similar can happen with writing as well, where we begin to elasticize our view of it. And, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50, hopefully not that long, years down the road, we'll be saying, yeah, all of this is writing. All of this is a form of graphic expression, and they're all equally valid forms.
And I think that for that reason, the people who in many areas, especially Indonesia now I come to think about it, are really leading that change are typographers and graphic designers. Because when you take, as I do in a sense, when you take some of these systems and you turn them into something which is, okay, I happen to have this one lying around here. So this is one of the Adinkra symbols from Ghana. The graphic power of that is sort of fascinating and undeniable. And you sort of go, yeah, I'd put that on a T-shirt, or I'd make earrings out of that. And in fact, there's all sorts of jewelers who are making earrings out of Adinkra symbols. And I think that may be the way in which the forms of transmission of meaning, should we call it, that might be under this elasticized definition of writing, sort of arrive bit by bit on the fringes of our consciousness. And with them comes the information that they are forms of writing or forms of way of conveying meaning. That is bin kabi, which is a proverb, and so people kind of go, oh, that's kind of interesting, and it's sort of also fascinating that while the academic linguistic community is still insisting on this sort of pretty narrow definition, others in the field who are outside those restrictions are free to play around with it. One of the things that I learned in writing my guitar book is that the guitar, the end of the 19th century, it had fallen a little bit from repute. It had been sort of overrun by the banjo and the mandolin in the United States, I'm talking about now. And when the first great concert halls were built right at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, deliberately looking like these temples of culture, because in part they were a reaction to the waves of immigration, first by the Italians, by the Irish, by the Chinese. You know, we must preserve Western culture. The guitar was not in the concert master's repertoire at the time. And so, you know, all sorts of other instruments, such as, you know, the clarinet, the bassoon, the cello, they were brought into the concert hall, and the guitar was left outside as a kind of a folk instrument. And what that meant was that guitar was free to change and develop, and people could experiment with it. And so the first amplified instruments, there was one violin, but most of them were guitars. And you could play with the number of strings it had and the materials it was made out of, and you could use it for all kinds of purposes, including ultimately jazz, you know. And I think we may see something similar there, where the people who are outside that that defining body, the people in charge of the definitions, are going to be doing so many interesting things with these various graphic forms that may have one foot in our definition of writing and one foot outside, or both feet outside.
Right.
What we're going to see is a sort of a general recognition that this is cool. It's going to be, I love your jazz analogy. It's like, yeah, something to this after all.
Right.
And in a way, the carvings that I do for the endangered alphabets, that's what people do. They say, wow, this is really cool. What is it again? What does it mean? You know?
Right. That, you know, I like that. I like what you're saying there, that analogy you make to the late 19th century, because let's be honest, we are seeing something similar, especially in the US and parts of Europe, with this idea of large cultural changes and demographic shifts are happening, and people are getting reactionary and getting scared, and they're saying this is what our culture is. They're trying to be very descriptive, not descriptive, but prescriptive about it. This is what our culture is. We must defend it. We must define it and defend it. And anything that falls outside of the bounds of it is not legitimate, essentially, anymore. I mean, we're seeing lots of that, let's be honest, and especially this last few years. And I like this idea of being able to have something good being able to come out of what is something very discriminatory, to say, okay, the people who find themselves outside of the halls of culture have a little bit more freedom, and hopefully eventually people wake up and realize the value that they're bringing.
And I think to bring this full circle and to wrap up, that's our continuing agenda, really. We're going to be doing a lot of activity actually with the traditional Native American inhabitants of the area where I live. And I learned so much from them about what it's like to be on the outside and to
absolutely
fall out. Yeah, even though they don't have an endangered alphabet in the sense of many of the other cultures we work with,
right?
It's a constant education to hear how they see things and why they see things that way.
Right.
And then I think also the continuation of the Red List, which is our effort to show that whole panorama. It's amazing how many times you can go online and there'll be a list of the world's top 15 alphabets or whatever. And what about the other 285?
Yeah, exactly. What about those not in the top?
Yes, exactly. So in broad sense, that's our agenda. And I have a bunch of ideas, some of them half-baked, some of them still in the mixing bowl. Some of them in the oven, but that's where we're going, and that's where we have to go. And everything that you and I have said today shows that there's so much historical precedent for what we're trying to do, even if the idea itself 100%. Is still outside people's scope of recognition.
Right. And that's very true. Whether people recognize it or not, whether people have been able to fully incorporate it into their personal cosmology, of recognized ideas, is sort of beside the point. The work is out there to do. These scripts exist, right? They have the right to exist, and it's up to us and the work we do to build that awareness, so that it does become part of people's larger awareness and part of their personal cosmology, and has a place of value within it.
And there's the back of the t-shirt.
Nice. Okay, we got to get working on this.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Michael.
No problem. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks so much.